100,000 soldiers pour through the shattered walls of Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the world, burning. Every church bell in the city rings at once, a wall of iron sound, and then they go silent, one by one, as each building falls to Ottoman steel. You are standing inside the convent of the Holy Trinity. The iron doors are sealed. The smoke is already visible through the window slits. The women around you have begun the funeral rite, not for the dead, for the living. You have 12 hours. Her name was Sister Theophano. She knew what those bells meant. She had watched empires end before, in texts, in prayer, in the whispered histories older nuns carried like wounds. But nothing in those texts prepared her for this, the silence after the last bell. Because that silence wasn't peace, it was transfer of ownership. By sunrise on May 30th, 1453, every Christian convent in Constantinople would be silent, permanently. Every textbook calls what came next tolerance. In 1521, 68 years after those bells stopped, an Ottoman tax official sat down in Thessaloniki with a ledger. He was not writing a record of protection. He was conducting a property inventory. Every convent building, every farmland plot, every inhabitant. The Tariq Defteri, the Ottoman cadastral register, did not list nuns as protected religious persons. It listed them as displaced assets to be catalogued, relocated or absorbed. Between 1453 and 1600, more than 300 convents across the Balkans and Anatolia were seized, repurposed as mosques, converted into grain warehouses or simply emptied. Some nuns were relocated, some were given a choice. Convert or forfeit everything: habit, name, community, identity. Some of the entries just stop. No relocation order. No death record. A blank space where a woman's name used to be. History called that blank space tolerance. If this is the kind of history they never taught you, subscribe now. This channel exists for exactly this. The nuns living inside those blank spaces called it something else entirely. Because what no textbook will tell you, what the scholarship has spent 5 centuries carefully not saying, is this: the millet system, the Ottoman framework that every modern historian cites as evidence of enlightened coexistence, was not designed to protect Christian women. It was designed to manage them. And there is a catastrophic difference between those two things, a difference that shows up in a sealed stone chamber, in 17 iron crosses buried underground, in a letter written in Greek in 1531 that ends mid-sentence, because the woman writing it ran out of time. That letter exists. The crosses exist. The blank spaces in the ledgers exist. And the story of how all 3 ended up where they are, one in a wax-sealed jar beneath an Ottoman warehouse floor, one in a diplomatic dispatch from a British embassy official, one in a museum catalogue tagged provenance unknown, is a story about how an empire erases women without, producing a single martyr. Without a massacre. Without a sword lifted in a way that history finds worth recording. No blood on the walls. No bodies to count. Just a ledger, a blank space, and a bell that stopped ringing and never started again. That is the system. That is what we're going to take apart. Go back to 1453. Not the battle. The 3 days after it. Ottoman soldiers weren't simply given Constantinople. They were given something more precise than that. Under classical Islamic law of conquest, applied to any city that refused to surrender, the victorious army was legally entitled to 3 days of unrestricted seizure. Property. Livestock. People. This was not chaos. This was policy. Documented, codified, administratively sanctioned, and George Francis, the private secretary of the dead Emperor Constantine Shi, survived it hidden in a cellar, listening to it happen above his head. He wrote down what he heard, what he later witnessed, what he could not stop. Soldiers entered Hagia Sophia during active liturgy. The service was still running. The priests had not stopped. They believed until the doors came off the hinges, that God would intervene as he had intervened before, that an angel would descend, that the walls would hold, that something would stop what was coming. The doors came off. The soldiers entered. The nuns were pulled from the altar mid-prayer. Chained, marched through the streets to Ottoman ships anchored in the Golden Horn, while the imperial palace burned behind them on the ridge. Francis records the separation. The younger nuns were pulled to one side, the older ones to the other. He doesn't explain why. He doesn't need to. Ottoman court records from 1455, 2 years after the conquest, lists 17 women from Constantinople's convents entered into imperial household service. The word used in the official record is gift, not prisoner, not slave. Gift. That is not metaphor or translation error. That is a primary source using its own precise language. And the iron crosses those women wore around their necks, the ones they had taken vows beside, the ones that marked them as belonging to God before any Ottoman court could claim them, those crosses appear later in Ottoman treasury inventories. Catalogued, valued, melted down and recast as Ottoman coins. The symbol of their faith, converted into Ottoman currency. That one administrative detail, that single line in a treasury ledger. It is what transforms this from a war story into something colder, and more deliberate, and far harder to look away from. Now pull back. Wider. The empire as a machine. The Devshirm is in every history textbook. The Ottoman child levy, Christian boys taken from Balkan villages, converted to Islam, trained as soldiers and palace administrators. The system is taught as brutal but functional. What the textbooks omit is the parallel architecture applied to women. Ottoman court records from the 15th and 16th centuries document Christian women, including women from active religious communities, transferred into palace service under the administrative term resettlement. The language was bureaucratic. The reality was structural. And it ran quietly, beneath the level of the events historians choose to record. In Trebizond, the last surviving Christian empire, conquered by the Ottomans in 1461, the entire community of the convent of Theoskopastos was resettled within 3 weeks of occupation. 3 weeks. The abbess, whose name appears in exactly one surviving Byzantine document, disappears from all records after that entry. No grave, no conversion certificate, no exile record, nothing. The blank space again, always the blank space. But here is where the system reveals its actual genius. The Ottomans did not need mass violence against convents. Violence produces martyrs. Martyrs produce saints. Saints produce feast days. Feast days produce memory. The system was more efficient than that. Isolation. Economic strangulation. Denial of building repair permits. Revocation of water rights. A convent that cannot fix its own roof empties itself over years, one woman at a time, without a single sword being raised in a way worth recording. Patience was the weapon. Time was the executioner. And patience leaves no martyrs, which means it leaves no memory. Everything you have been told about Ottoman religious tolerance is built on one legal foundation. The Pact of Umar. The conditions, codified across centuries of Islamic jurisprudence, applied and enforced by the Ottoman state, governing how Christians and Jews could practice faith under Islamic rule. Historians have cited it for generations as evidence of Ottoman goodwill. A framework of coexistence. A medieval model of pluralism. That is the version that appears in textbooks, in academic papers, in museum exhibition panels across Europe and North America. Here is what the Pact of Umar actually mandates. Christians could not build new churches, could not repair existing ones without explicit government permission, could not ring bells loudly enough to be heard in public, could not display crosses on the exterior of buildings, could not proselytize, could not legally prevent a Christian from converting to Islam, not a family member, not a member of their congregation, not a nun in their own community. And any Christian woman who converted to Islam could not be compelled to return to her prior life, her prior name, or her prior institution. Read that list again. slowly. Every single restriction directly targeted the operating conditions of a convent. The bells, silenced. The crosses, hidden. The buildings, frozen in decay, unable to be repaired without a permit that Ottoman administrators could grant or deny at will. The women, unable to stop their own congregants from walking out the door and vanishing into the administrative category of voluntary convert. The tolerance was a cage, and the cage had been built in the exact shape of a convent. Sister Theophano knew the pact. She had read it. She understood its architecture the way a prisoner understands the dimensions of a cell, not abstractly but physically, in the body, in the daily reality of what she could and could not do. She had watched 3 neighbouring convents empty during her lifetime. Not from violence, from paperwork, from permit denials, from wells that were administratively reassigned, from women who converted one by one until the critical mass that held a community together simply ceased to exist. And when she looked to the one institution that was supposed to protect her, the Patriarchate of Constantinople, the seat of Orthodox Christian authority, what she found was this: the Patriarch himself held his title only because the Ottoman Sultan had granted it. The Sultan appointed him. The Sultan could remove him. The man designated as the protector of Orthodox Christian women across the entire empire served at the pleasure of the empire that was dismantling them. He told her to be grateful for the tolerance she was living inside. That is the reframe. The cage was not imposed from outside by an identifiable enemy. It was administered from within by a protector who could not protect anyone without first protecting his own position. No one was coming. The system had been designed to make sure of it. And Sister Theophano, mid-16th century, Thessaloniki, watching her world contract permit by permit, census by census, conversion by conversion, had to make a decision with no good options and no institutional backing and no historical record waiting to receive her answer. She made one anyway. Thessaloniki. 1530. The Convent of the Transfiguration. 18 nuns remaining. It had housed 42 when the Ottomans consolidated control over the city. The others had left across decades, relocated, converted, died without replacement, slipped away in the administrative night. 18 women. A building that had not received a repair permit in 11 years. A roof that leaked through winter. A well that still functioned. For now. Then the Cadi arrived. A Cadi, an Ottoman judge, an officer of Islamic law with administrative authority over the non-Muslim communities in his district. He came 3 times that year. The visits are documented in Ottoman court records. First visit, a formal request to repurpose the convent building as a grain storage facility. The building's location, its stone construction, its proximity to the market, all administratively desirable. The abbess refused. The record notes her refusal without editorial comment. Second visit, the convent's water rights to the adjacent spring were revoked. Administratively reassigned to a neighbouring Ottoman property. Effective immediately. Third visit, the abbess was brought before the Qadi's court and formally asked whether she wished to convert to Islam. The court record preserves her answer in full. No. One word. Documented. Permanent. The bravest thing in the archive. What the record does not show is what happened in the 3 months following that answer. When an Ottoman traveller passed through Thessaloniki in 1533 and noted the building in his account, he described it as abandoned. No nuns. No abbess. No explanation. 18 women. 3 years. Gone. Not martyred. Martyrdom would have produced a record, would have generated saints, would have been remembered in liturgy and feast days in the long memory of the church. They were not martyred. They converted. Or they fled. Or both. The system was precise enough that mass violence was almost never necessary. It was also precise enough that individual suffering left almost no trace. Almost. Because somewhere beneath that building, beneath the grain the Ottomans stored there for the next century and a half, beneath the warehouse floor, beneath 450 years of administrative silence, something was still waiting. 1981. Thessaloniki. An archaeological team excavating beneath a former Ottoman grain warehouse breaks through a sealed stone floor. What they find stops the excavation. 17 iron crosses, arranged in a deliberate row, not scattered, placed. 2 wooden icon frames, the icons themselves long rotted, the carved borders intact, and a ceramic jar, sealed with wax, containing a document written in Greek on vellum, dated 1531. The jar had held 450 years underground, through Ottoman administration, through Greek independence, through 2 world wars, through the complete transformation of the civilization above it. The jar had held. The letter inside is addressed to no one. It begins without salutation. The abbess, unnamed as she would remain, was not writing for a specific reader. She was writing for whoever found it. She was writing for the record she understood no one else would keep. She describes the 3 Cadi visits with the precision of a legal witness. The water rights revocation. The court appearance. Her answer. And then she describes what happened the night before the building was finally taken. What the 18 women of the Convent of the Transfiguration did when they understood that no institution, no patriarch, no prayer was going to stop what was coming. They voted. A formal vote. Conducted by candlelight, documented in the letter, recorded in the abbess's own hand. 11 nuns would convert publicly. They would remain inside the system, as wives, as household staff, as whatever Ottoman administrative category absorbed them, and they would carry the convent's sacred objects hidden on their bodies. They would become the archive. 7 nuns would flee north under cover of darkness, toward Mount Athos, toward whatever remained of a world that could still receive them. The abbess chose a third path. She declines to name it in the letter. The document ends mid-sentence. Not at the bottom of a page, mid-sentence. As though she stood up and walked away from the words while they were still forming. No body was ever found. No grave, no conversion record bearing her name. Only the crosses, arranged in a row in a sealed chamber, by hands that understood they were creating the only memorial these women would ever receive. These women did not wait to be saved. They organised, deliberated, voted, dispersed, and buried the evidence themselves, because they understood that the record they left might be the only thing that outlasted the system trying to erase them. The 11 who converted appear in Ottoman records within the year, listed as wives, as domestic staff, as voluntary converts. The system logged their absorption as administrative success. It did not record what it cost them. It did not record what they carried hidden beneath Ottoman cloth, against their skin, in the place where an iron cross used to hang openly. The system recorded their absorption as a success. It did not record what it cost them to survive inside it. April 10th, 1821. Constantinople, Patriarch Gregory V, the highest-ranking Christian official in the entire Ottoman Empire, the man the Millet system had designated as protector and intermediary for every Orthodox Christian from the Balkans to Anatolia, is dragged from Easter liturgy and hanged from the iron gates of the Fana. His vestments still on his body, the service still running behind him when they took him. His crime, according to the Ottoman decree, failing to prevent the Greek uprising, failing to control his people, failing to make the cage hold. The message was architectural, precise, public. If the designated protector could be hanged from his own gates on Easter Sunday, in his vestments, mid-service, then the protection he had been offering was always conditional, always revocable, always a leash, not a shield. Every nun who had ever been told to be grateful for Ottoman tolerance was being shown, in this moment, exactly what that gratitude was worth. Now, watch what the empire does in the weeks that follow. Across Constantinople, across Thessaloniki, across Smyrna, Ottoman forces move through Christian neighbourhoods with a specific target hierarchy. Not the churches first, the convents. Because convents house women who cannot be conscripted into armies, cannot be taxed as soldiers, cannot be absorbed into military administration. They are the last organised Christian female communities in the empire. They are also, by 1821, the last institutional memory of what existed before the ledgers and the blank spaces and the permits denied. They are dismantled within months. A British Embassy report filed in August 1821, held today in the Foreign Office archives at Kew, documents the convent of St. George in Constantinople issued a formal notice, vacate within 48 hours. Several women refused. The report states, in the flat language of diplomatic correspondence, that the building was subsequently cleared. That word, in a document written by a British official with no political stake in the outcome, no reason to exaggerate, no narrative to construct. Cleared. The same word Ottoman administrators had been writing in their own ledgers for 370 years. The vocabulary of erasure, translated into English, filed in triplicate, archived in London, and then this. A British diplomat's wife, her name preserved in the embassy's social registry, her diary preserved in a private family collection, visiting Constantinople in 1823, writing about a market she wandered through near the Fenar. A street vendor. A small iron cross. The vendor told her it came from a convent. She purchased it. She recorded the transaction in her diary, noted its origin, and then wrote down the words she had seen in her husband's embassy reports. Cleared, she wrote. That is what they call it now. The cross that had hung around a nun's neck. That had been ripped free and melted into Ottoman coins in 1453. That had been hidden against skin beneath Ottoman cloth in 1531. That had been buried in a sealed chamber and left to outlast the empire. Now, in a street market. Now, in a diplomat's diary. Now in a private collection somewhere in England, catalogued or lost, or sitting in a box in an attic, with no label and no story, and no name attached. Cleared. That is what they call it now. Numbers. Start with the numbers. In 1453, the Orthodox Church operated approximately 400 convents across the territories that would become the Ottoman Empire. 400 institutions. 400 communities of women, educators, archivists, healers, the people who held the liturgical memory of their civilization in their hands and passed it forward. By 1600, 150 years after the fall of Constantinople, fewer than 60 remained active. By 1821, when Patriarch Gregory V was hanged from his own gates in his Easter vestments, fewer than 20. By 1923, when the Greek-Turkish population exchange forcibly expelled the last Orthodox communities from Anatolian soil, families whose roots in that land predated the Ottoman Empire by 1,000 years, the count of functioning Orthodox convents in Anatolia was 0, not 1. 0. The women who passed through those 400 institutions across 470 years, who took vows in them, taught in them, archived in them, voted by candlelight in them, hid iron crosses beneath Ottoman cloth, and buried evidence in sealed jars for archaeologists who wouldn't. Arrived for 4.5 centuries, those women numbered in the tens of thousands, the ones who appear in surviving historical records by name number fewer than 300. The rest exist only as blank spaces in Ottoman ledgers, as unnamed inhabitants removed, as voluntary converts whose prior identities were administratively deleted the moment they crossed from one census category into another, as women who vanished into the system so completely that the system's own records became the only proof they had ever existed, and those records were designed to record the absorption, not the person being absorbed. And the scholarship built on top of all of this? More academic papers have been published analysing the millet system as a functional model of religious tolerance than exist documenting what happened to the women those institutions housed. The field reflects the erasure, not because historians are malicious, but because the system was constructed to produce exactly this outcome. No martyrs means no saints. No saints means no feast days. No feast days means no liturgical memory. No liturgical memory means no popular pressure on academic institutions to investigate. The silence compounds itself, layer by layer, generation by generation, until the absence stops looking like a wound and starts looking like a fact. Until the convents appear to have simply faded, the way old things fade, without cause without perpetrator, without anyone to name, until no one thinks to ask the one question the blank spaces in the ledgers have been asking for 500 years. Where did the women go? The 17 iron crosses recovered from that sealed chamber in Thessaloniki in 1981 are currently held in the Byzantine and Christian Museum in Athens. Their official catalogue entry reads, "Devotional objects, provenance unknown." Unknown. The museum holds the full archaeological report from the 1981 excavation. The report references the 1531 letter directly, by date, by location, by content. The letter identifies exactly where the crosses came from, who arranged them in that row, why they were sealed beneath a stone floor instead of carried out into the world. The information exists. The museum has it. The catalogue entry was written after the report was filed. Provenance unknown is not an oversight. It is a curatorial decision. It is the same decision Ottoman tax officials made in 1521 when they wrote inhabitants removed instead of names. It is the same decision every administrative institution makes when it determines that certain women's histories are logistical rather than human, that what happened to them is a footnote to the history of the building they happen to occupy, not a history in its own right. Sister Theophano never received a martyrdom narrative. She did not die in flames, did not die at a sword's point, did not die in a way that history has ever found worth commemorating. She voted, or she fled, or she sat down with a jar and a piece of vellum and wrote a letter mid-sentence and stood up and walked into whatever came next, because she had no more time and she had done what she could with what she had. And 450 years later, someone found the jar, and the letter, and the crosses arranged in a deliberate row by women who understood they were building the only memorial they would ever receive. And then a museum tagged it provenance unknown. The iron cross she once wore openly around her neck, that became an Ottoman coin, that became a street vendor's trinket in a Constantinople market, that became a line in a British diplomat's diary, that became a catalogue number in a glass case in Athens, is now a museum object with no story. Attached to it, sitting in controlled light, correctly preserved, completely silent. That is not how history forgot these women. That is how history chose to. If this channel is doing the work that the institutions won't, finding the letters, reading the blank spaces, naming what the catalogues refuse to name, then subscribe. Share this. The algorithm buries this kind of history the same way the ledgers did. You are the only thing that pushes back against that. The convents are gone. The crosses are tagged. But the 1531 letter exists. The Sfrances Chronicle exists. The Foreign Office dispatches at Kew exist. The blank spaces in the Taria Defteleri exist. And blank spaces, if you know how to read them, are the loudest thing in any archive. And there are thousands of unexcavated sites across the Balkans and Anatolia. Beneath former Ottoman warehouses. Beneath mosques built on convent foundations. Beneath parking lots in cities that used to have different names. Sites where other women may have done exactly what the abbess of the convent of the Transfiguration did. Organised, voted, dispersed and buried the evidence themselves, trusting that the jar would hold longer than the empire. What other letters are down there? What other abbesses wrote mid-sentence and sealed the jar and walked away into the administrative silence? That question is what this channel exists to pursue, and the next video goes somewhere the history books refuse to follow.